At age 15, he was up and gone with nothing but his guitar and some blue jeans on. That is Tom Lavin of Powder Blues. At least that's how he tells it. Tom Lavin is the founder of Powder Blues, lead singer, guitar player, songwriter, and he had an incredible string of hits for a blues band out of Canada, like Thirsty Ears, Doing It Right on the Wrong Side of Town, Bopping in the Blues. Hear that guitar ring, and he is someone I have long admired and his music. And thank you for joining us on Narrative Drivetime today, where we talk to storytellers about storytelling. I'm Craig Colby, and I own the storytelling company, Colby Vision. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure's all mine, Craig.
So, Tom, I'm going to go way back. Earlier in your career, you were playing with bands like Prism. You were playing with bands like April Wine. You were involved in popular music, but you decided to go with blues. Why the blues?
Well, I mean, sure. As a musician, I started out really playing folk songs when I was a kid, just learning the standard Americana folk songs. And then I guess the first time I really tried to have a group, it was almost like a Kingston Trio or Limelighters kind of thing, right? It was a folk group, but I was always interested in harmonies, and I like the social commentary and stuff, but I heard blues really early. I grew up in Chicago, and Maxwell Street on Sunday morning was where they had the Maxwell Street Market on the Roosevelt Road there in Halstead Street, and I used to go down there on a Sunday morning with some relatives, and I would see all those guys that are now sort of legends were just sitting on the stoops of the tenement buildings with a little cigar box, playing blues on silver tone guitars. There was harmonicas. There was sometimes a guy to have a snare drum, but usually it was maybe just a tambourine or something, a harmonica guy and a guitar player. So I started, I heard that live by the time I was probably 6.5 years old, and I really dug it. And as I got older as a teen, that would have been the early 60s. And we'd already gone through this thing about musicologists saying, oh, we have to go back to Appalachia and find the birthplace of American folk music. And then they realized that there was a lot of music that had come from Africa and had gone down to the Delta with the slaves and with the freedom of the slaves. And after World War II, how that sound, the plantation sound or the chain gang sound, moved up the Mississippi and hit some of the towns up north. So I started hearing city blues. And a lot of those guys in the early 50s had just come up over the last 10 or 5 years. So from the ethnomusicologists looking at American folk music, they started looking at the heritage of Black American folk music. And so some of those colleges around Chicago started having blues concerts and having these guys that had up till then just played little stinky bars were now sort of like the roots of American Black music. And so those were guys like Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon and so many of the other guys that were based in Chicago. So I would occasionally get to see a concert at a little hall on the University of Chicago campus, on the Northwestern campus, or here and there. And I think really for me, the definitive concert was I was probably might have just turned 15 or something. I was with my best friend who was a couple years older, and he took me to see Buddy Guy and Junior Wells at Lake Forest College with Freddie Bilo on drums. I forget the bass player at the moment. I know who it is. And it just blew me away. It was the coolest thing. There was no such thing as PAs. You didn't mic the drum set. There was this huge Quonset hut. It was big enough to play soccer in. And it had a dirt floor, and they had 2 amps. They had one amp that was for the bass player, and then Buddy Guy and Junior Wells had a Showman, which is a single 15-inch speaker. And Buddy plugged in one channel of the Showman, and Junior plugged in the other channel of the Showman with a little microphone, and they played out of the same amp. And it superseded all this incredible electronic technology that we're burdened with now, because when Junior played his harp, it sucked the power out of Buddy's guitar. And so it was like having a compressor and the opposite way around. I watched this. They played the first set, and then Junior demanded cash in hand from this very wealthy college, private university in Illinois, extremely wealthy suburb. And of course, they were going to give him a check. So that was the WASP way to do things. That was not the way it was done on South Side. He said, there's no second set unless I get the cash. And they had to take the key and go through all the petty cash in the university to get up enough single dollar bills to pay him. We had to wait an hour for the second set while they got a pillow sack full of money to give to Junior. That was a good lesson to learn, aside from the music.
I'll tell you, I saw Junior Wells and Buddy Guy in 1983 in Detroit. I went to school at the University of Windsor. I went across. They were playing at some church. And it's funny that you mentioned that story because he was complaining about the sound all night. He kept pointing to the sound guy and pointing up and down. And the blues guys are so accessible. I went and talked to him afterwards, and he introduced me to Buddy Guy, and he complained about the sound. And I said, it's so great that we get a chance to talk to you. And he said, oh, we like it when the young guys come back and talk about the blues and drink some booze or smoke some weed. But I didn't even drink at that time, so I got scared and ran away.
Right. That's a very cool story. But there was no sound man. They were their own sound man.
He was mad at somebody. So in those early...
He channeled that anger pretty good, didn't he?
It sounded great. Yeah, he's one of the guys that I fell in love with first. So for you, the blues was like it was in your DNA from your youth. You grew up with it. I think being able to see those guys before you're old enough to get into bars is very formative.
Yeah, sure it was. And, and then even by the time, I was 17 and I was going to those bars because I guess I looked old enough or because they didn't give a damn. When somebody was going to buy a beer. But radio had a lot to do with it too, because, I grew up in Evanston, which is for a while till I moved to the suburbs. And that's just the north end of Chicago, basically, right on the border, the first town adjacent to north side of Chicago. And a lot of the blues happened on the north side of Chicago in the 60s because that's the white audiences were really into it. The blacks were mostly on the south side and on the west side. I did go down there eventually, but it was very accessible. And the radio, there was a lot of black radio stations. WVON not only played rhythm and blues, but it played chess records. You could hear Willie Dixon on the radio, or John Lee Hooker, or Etta James, or all kinds of people, right? And so Evanston was an integrated town in the 50s when I was there. I lived there from the time I was 3 until almost 7, about 4 years. But those are formative years. But even though it was an integrated town, it was still split into a black side and white side. And we lived on the black side because we didn't have any money. My dad ran a furniture store. We lived in the back of the furniture store. And so my best friend was named ironically Stuart White, and he was a very dark shade of skin color. And we listened to WVON and some of the other black rhythm and blues stations. I didn't hear anything else. So I came up listening to a lot of that stuff, aside from being able to see it every once in a while.
And now you're exposed to this growing up. My exposure to the blues, you were part of it. But the gateway drug for me was the Blues Brothers when they came along in 1980. And my best friend and Dave and I, we loved Accord and Blues, so we saw that, and it really opened our eyes. I started hunting around for blues artists to listen to. I went to anybody they covered. There was Junior Wells and there was Downchild, Sam and Dave. I got into B.B. King. But the great thing about Powder Blues is I was driving around in my parents' car in Thunder Bay, and on 580 CKPR, Bopping with the Blues comes out of the car radio. It was unheard of for me.
It was a little bit different than what kind of pop music was going on at the time.
It was wonderful. And I remember seeing you guys in 1982 with the CLE. And it was an amazing, we saw the year before they had a Northern Blues Fest with Willie Dixon, with the Chicago Blues All-Stars, with Downchild, with Luther Allison, who I'm going to ask you about later.
Yeah, I remember Luther.
Yeah, we'll talk. I'm saving to talk about him because I loved him so much. So you were part of that great blues awakening for me. and the bands that I love. When you started getting into the blues, who are your favorites?
I don't know. I think when I really got serious about playing blues guitar and stuff, I think Freddie King was maybe that record. Freddie King Sings on King Records. That might have been one of my most influential records. But I listened to so many people. I had studied flamenco a little bit when I was in Chicago, and I played folk guitar. I had my best friend and I played a lot of bluegrass music. So I guess there were a lot of different influences. Some people have heard some of this stuff and said, well, there's country influences. Well, sure. I mean, I was playing bluegrass for a while as a teenager because it was just another thing that came from Appalachia, but it was from the white side of stuff. And when the black music and the Appalachian hillbilly music got together, you had rockabilly. So, there were all kinds of, now they talk about cultural appropriation, but I think that's a great thing to have cross-cultural influences. No one is stealing from anybody. I mean, a perfect example was when we were playing Montreux in '83, in the summer of '83 in Switzerland. I had to do a press conference, and there was all these European music journalists. And a lot of them had like a chip on their shoulder and said, well, what are you white guys doing playing music that belongs to black people? And John Lee Hooker happened to be sitting next to me. And he jumped in and he said, what are you talking about? This is nothing about color. These guys are playing just as legitimate blues as I'm playing. You guys are way off base. And I never forgot Hooker because normally he wouldn't do that. He was a man of few words. But John and I became pretty good friends. Previous to that, we knew each other. And he was a big fan of the band, used to come up and jam with us all whenever we were in the same city. If John's show was done before ours, you'd see him in the wings, waiting to come on and boogie with us.
This is something I've wanted to talk to you about too, the cultural appropriation versus building and growing, right? Everything builds on everything else. The blues from the field hollering wasn't the blues from, downtown Chicago. It wasn't Muddy Waters. It built on that. I think you've answered where you stand on cultural appropriation. It's building art. But John Lee Hooker stood up for you. How were you received by the other blues artists, being a white band coming into traditionally thought of as a black genre?
Well, I mean, there were people that liked us and people that didn't like us, and some of it was racial. Yeah, so it's sort of like in Europe, it was reverse racism. You're not allowed to do that because you're white, but that was silly. And then there were some right in the same family. I remember Willie Dixon was on the show with us that summer at Montreux, and he had two of his sons. One was, I'm thinking now, the bass player. Isn't his name Floyd? And the other guy's name was Butch, with the piano player. Anyway, his son, the bass player, just loved us and wanted to jam with us and thought we were the coolest guys and just wanted to talk music and play music. But his other son didn't like white people and refused to have anything to do with us and would give us nothing but angry looks. And this was the sons of Willie Dixon, who, I knew, and we played together, and I think he accepted what we did. I don't know if we were his favorite band. I know B.B. King liked us a lot. I played many, many shows with him. So I think it's very personal. With Albert Collins, we did sort of our own version of Frosty, and we were playing with him once in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at a great club there. It's long gone now, but it was very famous at the time, called Jonathan Swift's. And Collins just had real angry. That's my song. I said, well, it's 12-bar blues, and we're just soloing on it. All of our songs are based on that. But he was not a happy guy. So there's some happy campers and some that are not.
I can see this, I can see why B.B. King would like you. It's a big horn section. You guys have a big sound. How would you describe?
I was very influenced by B.B. King. I mean, he was a huge influence. Here, there's a picture I have on my wall. I don't know if you can see this.
I can see it.
You see the guy with the long hair and the mustache at the bottom of the
Yeah, I've read about this. I've read about this picture about him.
He signed that for me too. 30 years later, that would have been 1973 at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre in Vancouver, and I was opening the show for him. And we were sitting in the dressing room. You could see he's eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he has an old Vienna stubby. And I was looking at the Kentucky Colonel, and I thought it was so ironic because I figured that Colonel's parents might have owned his parents, and how different things were. I think I asked him at this point. I said, "I just heard you play Sweet Little Angel, and it sounded very fresh. How do you manage to play that song hundreds of times and keep it fresh?" And he was explaining to me in this picture, he was saying, well, some people don't know what a B.B. King is, and it's my job to make sure they don't get the wrong idea. Now, I think just after this, he gave me a guitar pick that I had for many years. But subsequent to that first time of actually sitting down and talking with him at length, we played, oh gosh, lots of shows, dozens probably. I interviewed him for radio. I interviewed him for TV. We played on each other's stages. And later on in our careers, his drummer, Tony Coleman, played with Powder Blues for a while. So we even shared players. And Russell Jackson, who was his bass player, also played with me. So for a time, I had B.B. King's rhythm section on tour in Canada. We had a good relationship. And he never got her name right. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Power Blues Band." Never got the D in. Anyway, I'll put this back. I keep that next to my desk here, along with some of my other musical friends and heroes. I was never one to look for photo ops. So it's just
here. I'm gonna share one with you too, since we shared that. Hold on one second. B.B. King was nicer to me than I deserved to be nice to when he signed this for me back at, I don't know if you can see the signature down there, back at some remote bar in Detroit when I got to go backstage and meet him and babbled at him for, I don't know, I said about half an hour's worth of words in about 20 seconds. And all he did was smile and nod and I didn't ask him to autograph the picture. I had the picture. He took it out, signed it, and said, "I hope you enjoyed the show." Just lovely to me. And a lightning show.
He was great, man. But he was just, he ran a very tight ship. If you remember his band and you were on a gig and it was a break, you had to stand 15 feet away from him until he beckoned you, and would only ever respond to the word boss, because he could have been talking to somebody or giving an interview, and he didn't want bandstand problems surfacing and making it to the press. He was a very strict band leader. Maybe not so bad as Buddy Rich, but he was a tough guy, and that was great. I remember once I was playing a ballroom in North Vancouver, I think. We were doing a double bill, and we were on a break, and we were standing there, and some girl was doing a quick interview in the break, and then some guy walked up and said, had a $50 bill in his hand. This would have been in the early 80s, and said, "Will you play Stormy Monday?" And I thought he was going to be insulted or be pissed off, and he just came out so smooth that $50 bill disappeared into his jacket pocket, and he said, "It'll be my pleasure." And the guy smiled and laughed, and he turned to me and he said, "Never turn down money."
It's hard to beat that advice. Who else that you admired did you get a chance to play with and form a friendship with?
Well, I mean, friendship there's a lot of
a collegial relationship.
Leeway in friendship. I think I played with Stevie Ray before he was very well known. That would have been probably 80 or 81. We did a little bit of the Eastern Texas circuit with him, played a few gigs with him. And I was blown away. I think that he played better at that time than he was ever captured on record. I saw some really miraculous guitar playing. Not that his records were lousy. I liked his records. But I think we had a mutual friendship and a mutual respect, and he actually wound up putting some horns in his band after seeing us, and we related. He was a very nice guy, very down-to-earth fella. But I mean, really, it's. I don't really think I've never really thought about that. About, oh well, here's all the famous guys I played with, and and all this. Cotton and I knew each other from probably. I knew him in
Cotton, the
Chicago.
harp player.
I met him in Chicago in '67, and I played a show with him at the Gordons in Vancouver in '69, and then subsequently. Actually, there's a funny story. This would have been the early '80s, I believe, and we were playing a really big hall in London, Ontario. And James had a very hot band at the time. I think Kenny Johnson, the left-handed drummer, was just a monster. Long dead, was playing with James. And he went out there smoking and refused to get off the stage. And he was supposed to play, 40-minute warm-up set. He must have played 90 minutes. And he wrung that audience dry. There wasn't a clap left in that hall. And we went out to play to this limp dish rag. And it was really hard to get a buzz out of him. Even though we had a bunch of hit records, we were sounding good, the band was very tight. We'd played with him before. But he wrung that audience dry. So I guess it was probably about 6 weeks later. And we were in Chicago playing a big club on the north side called the On Broadway Club. And we were opening for James Cotton in his hometown. And I had learned my lesson. We wrung that room dry. And he got on stage and there was nothing left in that room. So, I mean, we traded fours there for a while. But I mean, we were in the same band rooms doing the same illegal substances, and we knew each other he was at Montreux with me too. Cotton was.
Let's talk about Montreux, because this is where we get into Luther Allison, who is, one of the first people the first person I saw live who just lit me up and showed me what the blues was. And
not that many people know who Luther Allison is. So
not enough people know who Luther Allison is.
I applaud you.
Yeah, well,
good taste.
We would go and talk. We were such fans, and we were, as part of our education, we'd go and talk to people. He talked to us at length every time. He sent me a postcard from Copenhagen. It was supposed to be an album, but I'm happy to have the postcard. Can you tell me about that? And Luther Allison was like a cross between, if B.B. King and Jimi Hendrix had a love child, it would be Luther Allison. That was my sense of it. I can see some disagreement there, but
not really. Not really. I mean, from my association with Luther was sort of, I'm a skeptic pretty well, and I'm definitely not an occultist in any way. But my first meeting with Luther Allison was soul shaking. It was, and I could see it was the same for him. I think we were doing a sound check at the big hall in Montreux. He had done his sound check, and then I was doing my sound check, and then he listened to me, and then he came off from the wings and picked up a guitar and threw a line at me, and I threw one back at him, and then we just got into this guitar thing. And we were standing there looking at each other, and this weird thing was going through my mind, because, I mean, you look at photographs of us, we don't look anything alike, but sort of physically we were long and lanky and had oval faces, and we played the guitar, and we maybe had a bit of a similar style in some ways. Certainly our musical approach was similar. But I was looking at him, and it was almost like you ever get a negative of a photograph, so everything's reversed, and then you can hold it in the light, and you get the reflections off it, and it goes positive for you for a minute by looking at a clear negative, a photo transparency. I was looking at Luther Allison and thinking, that's me, only I'm black. And he was looking at me with the same look, like, who the hell are you? And why do you remind me of me? And we had this sort of moment of recognition. And then we walked up and got face to face to one another and basically, who the hell are you? And how did you get here? And how come we are relating on this instantly on this really deep musical level? It was very weird, man. Meeting Luther was something else. He was a neat guy. I'm sorry that he died so young. I know he was living pretty hard, but he was an amazing musician, great guitar player.
Yeah, I loved him. I loved him. And I remember the last time I had a chance to see him, I couldn't get in. It was in 1995 outside a club in New York. I could only stand outside and listen because I couldn't get in. And then after that, he died.
He was gone. Yeah, he's been gone a long time. There's another guy that's even less known, which is Buddy's brother, Phil.
Yeah.
Now, Phil Guy is an excellent guitar player, but his style is not much like Buddy's. Like when I saw Phil was at Montreux too, along with me and Luther and Hooker and Dixon and John Hammond was there. But Phil at that time really sounded like B.B. King, and he was playing a Les Paul, and he played really well. I was knocked out, but he never had a 1/100th of the acceptance or recognition that Buddy had.
Let me just talk about acceptance for a minute, and even go back to you and Luther Allison. You know, I made a big deal at the top about having hits as a blues band in the 80s. When I looked at it, it really wasn't that unusual. George Thorogood was having hits. Stevie Ray Vaughan was having hits. You were having hits. The only real blues artist I can think of with the crossover hits was Robert Cray. So there were hits, but there weren't many black artists having blues hits. You know, why do you think it is that people know about powder blues, but they don't know about Luther Allison?
Well, Luther wasn't writing pop tunes. Doing It Right's not exactly a blues tune; it's a pop tune. And why do blues aficionados not know Luther? Well, I mean, it's a crapshoot. Maybe he was on the wrong label at the wrong time, and he spent a lot of his career in Europe. He's much better known there. I mean, look, there's guys that were easily at that musical level and more that are unknown, that are genius. Look at Lucky Peterson.
Oh, he's amazing.
A monster guitar player and an even better keyboard player and a terrific singer. I mean, I remember when I was sitting with Jeff Healey once, and he hadn't heard Lucky, and I played him some Lucky stuff. And Lucky was he had ways of syncopating at twice the resolution. So if you were thinking in 16th note syncopations, he could be playing a 16th note phrase, but syncopate in 30 seconds, which is a very eerie feeling and something you wouldn't even notice unless you were really on the money. And I deliberately played this one solo for Jeff to see what had happened to him. And when those syncopations came, I watched him go like this, and then he said, wow, that guy can really play. But he'd heard the same thing I'd heard. But why wasn't Lucky in Europe for a time? B.B. King opened for Lucky Peterson. He was a bigger.
Wow.
And look at Johnny Guitar Watson, who Etta James said, that's the true king. B.B. King is not the king. Elvis Presley is not the king. Etta said, Johnny Watson is the king of that kind of music. I was a huge Johnny Watson fan. And yeah, I mean, in the blues era, he had Gangster Love, which Steve Miller lifted. And then afterwards, in the funk era, he had It's a Real Mother for You and Ain't That a Bitch and some of those other big funk hits. But what a monster. And why he was huge in Europe, but he never, except for a small cult audience, he never broke big time in the States. We can go on and on with examples.
It's kind of a mystery. How much of what you do you consider storytelling?
Well, these days, if I play a show, I've found that people like to hear a little bit of background to, how we came across the tune or what the significance is or who wrote it or, what is a little bit of insight into what it's about. It's a way to connect with the audience. I like that. I don't, I guess you could be a good performer and pose and just go through a routine and people can go, what a great singer, what a great player, what great songs. But I thrive on connection, so I don't talk any different to an audience than I'm talking to you, really.
Mm-hmm.
I try and feel and make them open a pathway for them to get a little more inside the music. And sometimes a little bit of story can help, I think.
How about inside the songs themselves? How much storytelling do you do in the songs?
Well, I mean, Thirsty Ears is a story. My brother wrote that. Hear that guitar ring. He wrote most of the words to that, but I wrote the music to it. So, I mean, I think his songs are a bit more story-like. Mine, Doing It Right, which was one of my bigger hits, was absolutely about playing the spinning wheel, which was a tiny little bar in Gastown and where the band really started. But a lot of it's double entendre, but it takes certain people to read between the lines to know what things are about. And it's like magicians don't give away their tricks. Why should you have to explain what's between the lines? Some people see it, some people don't. That's the beauty of art.
And what's next for Powder Blues once we can get out of this pandemic?
Hey man, we had a big summer tour booked for 2020. I didn't even attempt to do it in 2021. So I mean, it's I think we've played 2 video simulcasts in the last 18 months. That's it. I haven't played live for over a year and a half. That's not fun. I mean, I don't have to play to pay my bills. I'm okay. But I like to play. And it's not so much, some performers, I think they really like my good friend, the late Long John Baldry. Man, he thrived on applause. I mean, it was just like blood to a vampire. That guy just got this huge, I mean, he was really a performer and he loved his audience and he could be in pain and sick as a dog, but if people clap, this huge spirit came out of him. I'm not like that. I want to make sure that, people are getting what they want to hear and feel and all that. And I emote as best I can. But for me, playing is like getting with the old guys. I love being with my musicians and trading licks and just having that chemistry feel. That's why I do it. And I miss it. Yeah. And I know my guys miss it. We talk about it all the time. 2 of them were over with me at the beach the other day. My marvelous bass player, Tony Marriott, and my keyboard player, Mike Clanch. And we're just sitting around talking about how much we miss just having the odd gig, So hopefully we get past this virus. Maybe we'll be able to get back to that sort of stuff. But it's a different world these days.
It is. Well, listen, you miss playing. I sure miss hearing you. The last time I saw you was at the Thunder Bay Blues Fest. I went up just to hear you guys play. And it was well worth the trip. That's my hometown. My parents there. I didn't go anywhere unusual, but I just love the music you do. It's been part of my blues awakening. You're one of my favorite bands. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And as far as I'm concerned, Powder Blues, they do it right on any part of town.
That's very kind of you, Craig. And it's been enjoyable talking to you as well. And hopefully we'll see each other further on up the road.
Yeah, well, listen, if you're coming to town, I'm definitely going to contact you ahead of time. And if I can buy you a drink and listen to a few more of your stories, I would love to do that.
Twist my rubber arm.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom Lavin of the legendary Powder Blues Band. If you got thirsty ears, he's the guy to go to. And I think we would both tell you, go find some Luther Allison and listen to some Luther Allison, and your life is going to be better for it.
I'm there for that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Are you a storyteller who wants to tell the story of how you tell stories? Yes? Then I want to hear from you. Drop me a line at craig@colbyvision.net and tell me a little bit about yourself, your career, and some of the particulars of your process. Colby Vision is a storytelling company working in the broadcasting and the business world. Send me an email if you need help with either. Thanks to Tim Vesely for the music, and Kevin Francisco for the graphics, and Dave White for the editing. And thanks to you for watching Narrative Drive Time.